Okay, it's not often I make a video about feminism whereby I want to laugh, because more often than not it is based on frustrations and contempt for their divisions. But what I've just seen is so absurd that it's hard not to laugh. It's a video posted by a guy, and he's sort of saying that this was hosted on the BBC recently. You have to see this thing to believe it. Basically, it's a group of women who call themselves feminist performance artists. I think they've got something to do with some theatre company. And they're supposedly trying to replicate the sirens of Greek mythology. But I think in most people's language it's nothing but a racket. This is adult women on a stage screeching and yelping like a herd of monkeys. There's no other way to describe it, really. Um, it's bizarre, and it's quite amusing. But what isn't amusing is that so much of the media establishment, including the BBC, hold this rubbish up as credible. Now, I'm all for expressing free arts. They have a right to do it, but surely this shows just how this is symbolic of just how pathetic third wave feminism has become. Now, even if feminists will say, oh, well, they don't represent all feminists, they need to realise that increasingly third wave feminism is losing its credibility. And I actually feel quite optimistic in this video. Very often when I talk about feminism, it's from a frustrated context, it's from a fed up context, but I'm actually feeling somewhat optimistic now, because I genuinely believe that roughly in the last year and a half, 2 years, there has been a clear turnaround. One noticeable sign of that is when Time magazine put feminism on a word on the top of their list when they done a poll for words that people think should be banned. They ended up rather cowardly retracting that, despite it was the result of their own poll. In other words, apologising to the feminist mob because they didn't like what they heard. But I can definitely see a visual sea change. You know, for so long, third wave feminism has been trying to impose its way and bully anyone who doesn't agree, and they still try that, but I think finally people are starting to wake up and realise that this isn't just about angry men's rights activists complaining about feminism. This is something that actually many people with a brain and with human decency can see is just going too far. And it's got nothing to do with equality, and it's got everything to do with control. Another example would be when the scientist, I forget the guy, I think it was Matt Taylor was his name, who famously landed a probe on a comet. What should have been his moment of glory was hijacked by bitter feminists who could only focus on his t-shirt. These are women who demand the right for women to express themselves whatever way they want, but when a man does it, they vilify him. I came across a group last night which was actually called Feminists Against Tumblr Feminism. This naturally caught my attention. The admin of the group, she admitted she herself was not a feminist, but she believed that feminism has been hijacked from its original purposes by this, what she calls Tumblr feminism, which I think can be translated as third wave feminism. Now, to people who are critical of feminism and to Muscus, I strongly recommend you check out that group. It's on Facebook. It's called Feminists Against Tumblr Feminism. You'll be pleasantly surprised. It's absolutely not what you might expect a feminist group to be. Although, argue that it's not really a feminist group, because the admin herself admitted that she's not a feminist, but she believes that original feminism had noble purposes, but it's went too far. My stance is something similar. I'm not opposed to all feminism, and I believe that it is important to understand historical context. Early feminism was absolutely important, but she recognises, and the people who support that group recognise, it's a bit like Women Against Feminism. They recognise this movement has simply went too far, and it's just a very narrow, pathetic, toxic little movement that really doesn't represent anybody but themselves. They certainly don't represent all women. That's an odious distortion they try to make. And there's a few things I'd like to highlight about all of this. Firstly, I think even there are women out there who might call themselves feminists, but they actually, even they are starting to wonder, is this really about equality? I have come across decent women who might describe themselves as feminists, and actually I would say something. I think in the Western world it is inevitable that people get caught up in powerful lobbies, and anything that has a powerful hold of the media, which I believe feminism does have, with the best intentions in the world, you're going to be influenced by it to some extent. So I think many women in the West are not hardcore man-hating feminists. I think they're just subject to what feminism has done. I'm not saying those women are stupid, I'm just saying that it's got to a situation whereby if a woman doesn't call herself a feminist, she'll find herself stigmatized. So women are almost put under pressure to do that. That's why I've seen a lot of decent women who I believe call themselves feminists because they feel it's the right thing to do. I'm not saying they're stupid, I'm just saying that it comes down to a sort of social pressure, because you're considered to be a freak with two heads. No offence to Siamese twins, but the point I'm making is that it's, you can't underestimate the power of third wave feminism. And that's not conspiracy theory. If you look at the sort of hold it has on media outlets like the BBC, there is absolutely no free expression when it comes to third wave feminism. There really isn't. Because the BBC, for example, doesn't offer alternative views when it comes to something like third wave feminism. So that suggests the third wave feminist lobby has a very, very powerful hold on the BBC. And given that the BBC is still the world's biggest broadcaster, that should be quite concerning. If you think I'm exaggerating, I remember a time when they did actually bring up the issue of, is masculinity being overshadowed in Britain? Now that was a 10-minute segment. Guess what? It ended up being all about women's rights. Now surely that shows that these people have an agenda and they're winning at least the media war. But in a day-to-day basis in the real world, I think people are starting to realise what this is all about. And feminists might say, oh well, the extremists don't represent us. But you've done nothing to silence them. You've done nothing to condemn them. You've done nothing to challenge their thinking. So if you're a moderate feminist and you genuinely do believe in equality, you can't really complain that feminism has a bad image, because you've been silent against the extremists. It's a bit like regular Muslims who mind their own business, who go to the mosque, who don't impose their faith on others, can't really complain that there is a focus on Islamists, because the Islamists are extremely loud and incredibly destructive. Now I'm not saying that third wave feminism is the same as Islamism, obviously it's not, but third wave feminism, I genuinely believe, is at its core a very hateful movement. I mean, any movement that is based on division is by nature a destructive movement, and that's what third wave feminism is. It's a waste of trying to debate with some of the women involved in this, and some of the men for that matter. In fact, some male feminists are even more blowhard and arrogant and stubborn as their female counterparts. I've been in heated debates with male feminists, and trying to get them to see any reason is an utter waste of time. Now they might just charge, oh well, you're not being objective. I believe I am objective on this thing, because I'm saying not all feminism is bad. I'm not saying all feminism is evil. I don't make sweeping statements about feminism like all feminists are man haters or something like that. So I am objective on this, but I I would want to see a situation whereby more public figures are starting to speak out, and not just men, women as well. Um, they need to start standing up to feminists. So public figures who genuinely think this is a problem, they need to have the confidence to speak out and not be censored, or not lose their job, or not be forced to apologise by a mob of raging, rabid feminazis. And the fact is, the feminazis are a minority, but they're a very loud minority, and that's the problem. So when a minority takes hold of a movement, that's what the movement becomes. That is the thing about third wave feminism. Individual feminists may well be all about equality, and they may well be decent people, and they may well love their husbands and their brothers and so on. So it's not about saying that all feminists hate men. I don't believe they do. But I do believe that the extremists have managed to take over the movement. That's why feminism has a bad image. It's no good just saying to people, oh, you don't understand feminism. No. I understand movements by their actions. It's a bit like, recently I had an argument with, it was very amicable, I have to say. We weren't yelling at each other, but there was a communist in Newcastle City Centre, a guy from the Communist Workers' Party, and he was with a group who were protesting against the cuts. Now, some of the things they were saying were true, about the government focusing on the most vulnerable and so on. There was a lot of points that I couldn't argue with. But I said, look, you're going to polarise people, because the vast majority of people are not going to endorse the Communist Party. They're simply not. And then I put it to him that de facto communism, not ideal communism, de facto communism, that is how it was presented in the 20th century, is what people have to go on. So it's no good just saying, oh, well, Lenin had the right mindset. You know, because communism is rightly judged on the actions of Stalin and Mao. Communists might not like that fact, but that's what happened. And you know, it's a failed ideology, because I think it will always be hijacked by madmen. And every example of communism has always resulted in totalitarianism. So third wave feminism is somewhat similar in the sense it is a totalitarian movement. It does force people to agree. Despite all its claims about free choice, it is actually all about imposing its will on others. It doesn't allow scope for dissent at all, because anyone within the movement who tries to offer a differing opinion is shunned and sidelined, because they're not part of the agenda. I think I saved the link to that video. It's funny, but it's incredible that the BBC would take that as credible. Really, it is incredible. Another point I would make about third wave feminism, I think it is somewhat brainwashed a lot of women into thinking that it's morally justified, because their oratory is powerful, and like I say, you can't underestimate the influence of it. You know, any movement that promotes victimhood is going to have some effect. And that's what feminism does. That's what third wave feminism does. It encourages women to believe that they're all victims and that all men are oppressors. Now, women who support it will say, no, 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 we don't believe that. But you try getting into a debate with people who are taken in by this movement, and you'll see what I'm talking about. You really can't have an objective debate. It's like going up against a brick wall, because all the facts that you present to them are just thrown back. I had a heated debate with someone I know well who happens to be a feminist, and every valid point I made about double standards and hypocrisy, all she kept throwing back at me was, and this was like putting her foot down, feminism is about equality. You have to believe that. And I said, okay, what it comes down to is what you're saying is you're trying to control other people's free expression. That's what she was getting at, but she didn't listen. So it's actually very difficult to have a debate with people who are so brainwashed by their own bullshit. It would be like trying to have a debate with a Red Guard in 1960s China. When someone is that brainwashed, by their dogmatic belief in a certain movement, then it's very difficult to try and get them to see reason. So I think the main thing is, those of us who really are humanist or egalitarian, or I'll say it, moderate feminists, need to really tackle this in a responsible way. I don't think it's really effective saying that, oh, you hate feminism and feminists and sort of, and I've seen some so-called masculists who then come out and say they hate all women and this sort of crap. That doesn't help anyone. And I've also spoken out against hardcore masculism, because I do think there is misogyny within that. But yeah, in the end of the day, it's up for all free-thinking, sane men and women to work together and just end this petty gender war bullshit. You know, feminists will say that attacking feminism is being against equality. I would argue it is their movement that is creating far more division and far more mistrust and far more hypocrisy, obviously, than anything else. There is misogyny out there, there is misandry out there, but you don't tackle those movements by attacking the entire opposite gender. And despite what they claim, third wave feminism constantly promotes negativity against men and masculinity. It's just a fact. Okay, I'll leave it there. Let me know your thoughts, but I want to give the impression that the overall tones of this video is optimistic, because I do think people are starting to, I think the tide is turning actually. Might not seem that obvious, but I do think gradually the tide is turning, because more and more women are speaking out against it, and the number of groups that are opposed to this movement are starting to now rival the number of groups that support it, because there is a very strong feminist presence online, and spiteful websites like Jezebel are starting to be challenged. Peace, everyone.